Blood Over Brighthaven was one of my most anticipated reads of 2025. Ever since I finished Sword of Kaigen, I had to read everything and anything written by ML Wang. And while I did enjoy it, there were definitely some things that didn't really strike me in the same way that Sword of Kaigen did. So today I want to go through the plot, the characters, the tone, some nitpicks, some miscellaneous thoughts, just an overall general review. We may be getting into some spoilers. I think I'm going to try and do a plot overview first here right after this little preamble and then get into some spoilers, but I will mark it, I will talk about it, I will say when we're getting into the spoilers. First and foremost, like I always say, we've got to start with a plot overview because that's just what you do with a book report. So here we go. Blood Over Brighthaven, dark academia book written about Siona Freinin, who is trying to become the first female mage in an order of mages. Pretty interesting premise. She enters into the magehood after passing a test and is kind of played a practical joke on and given a assistant mage who is actually a janitor who comes from a race of people in this world that are downtrodden, looked upon, subjugated. They're the Quen. They come from the outer world, and a lot of them have risked their lives to move to the inner world where Siona Freinin and the Mages Guild lives and works and operates. And because of their magic, they are protected from the Blight, which is the dangerous famine, death thing that is happening to the people of the outer world. So a lot of the people of the outer world will brave the crossing to get into this new world, to give themselves even a fighting chance, even though they are going to be looked upon with prejudice, they are going to be trampled on, they are not going to be offered great economic opportunities. It is better than dying of starvation or getting torn apart by blight. So that's where we go. As she enters into the mage hood, she is placed with a Quen named Tomo, who will be her assistant. It's a practical joke played on her by the upper echelon of the mages, but she says, you know what, I'm going to work this to my advantage. Come along, Tomo, I'll teach you how to be a mage and we can work through these problems together. I think I'll probably cut it off there. There's some hijinks ensue. There's some, interesting subplots. There's some interesting mystery. There's the unraveling of the magic system in the world in which they live. But if we go any further, I think we may be getting into spoilers. So we are going to stop there with the plot synopsis and we'll move to a general overview of the characters. And in talking about the characters, I will say spoilers from here on out. Something that I really loved about Sword of Kaigen and ML Wang's writing in general was the fact that her character work is pretty impeccable, especially for standalone novels. Oftentimes character work and character arcs are drawn out in longer series, and authors, I think, maybe feel like they have a little bit more time to spend with each character to draw it out through a 3-book or a 5-book arc. But if you are writing a standalone fantasy novel like Sword of Kaigen and Blood Over Brighthaven are, you don't have much time. But what she does in the 800, 700 pages of these books is some of the better character work that I've ever read. In fact, it blows some of the longer series character works out of the water. She has such a deft touch at arcs of characters, and I think Siona Freinin as our main protagonist is no different. I will say that I connected a little bit more with the protagonists in Sword of Kaigen, and you will see throughout this video that I did enjoy Sword of Kaigen a little bit more, and I'm kind of unfairly framing Blood Over Brighthaven against Sword of Kaigen. That's just the framing that I'm using to kind of think about this book on its own, because they are both by the same author, and I've seen the, I guess, peak with Sword of Kaigen. I'm kind of a little bit disappointed with Blood Over Brighthaven, not to say that it was bad. I very, very much enjoyed it, but when we're comparing it to Sword of Kaigen, it feels a little bit off. So character-wise, Sword of Kaigen, the characterization in that book is some of the best that I've ever read. And in this, it is good, but there are a few things that just felt a little bit off. I will say, specifically with Siona, very well-written character. She definitely starts in a place of being overly selfish, but because we as modern readers can kind of read into the patriarchal and anti-feminist society in which she lives in, we have something to latch onto to say that even though she is being very selfish, we can see why she is working selfishly towards her overall moral good that she's working towards, to become the first mage in the Mages Guild, to break the glass ceiling if you want to apply a real-world metaphor to this text. So we understand, okay, she's working in a corrupt system, and that's why she's being incredibly selfish. But as we go through her character arc, as we see that she is still incredibly selfish with other oppressed peoples in the world, with Tamil and the other Quen, she really doesn't give a damn about their struggle because it is not her struggle. Her selfishness truly bears fruit when we have the interactions between her and Tamil, between her and her working class cousin and aunt, between her and other Quen that she comes in contact with. It is literally just about her, and her struggle is the only thing that matters. But as the story goes, as some things are revealed to her about the magic system in which she works and lives and has dedicated her life, she is able to then broaden the fact that her struggle is part of a grander struggle in the society in which they live in. And there's moments where, while she is still herself, while she is still the Siona from the beginning of the book, there are moments where she makes decisions against her own self and ultimately makes the ultimate decision, giving up her life, and more importantly, I think to her, giving up her legacy as a mage to offer an opportunity to the Quen people to have a better life. So that arc works so well for me. I have seen some people complain that it moves a little bit too quickly from, mage who's all, totally ambitious and only wants to work within her system of breaking the patriarchal bounds, but still wants to be a mage and be on track to be a great magician, to kind of a bleeding heart, kind of overly empathetic with a lot of the, oppressed peoples of the age and of the location in which she lives, which I understand it feels a little fast, but then I think it worked for me because what she sees and what she finds out, the way that magic is done through sacrificing the people that live in the outer lands, that is such a shocking revelation that it worked for me that she would make such a complete 180 of a character shift. It was such a breaking of the systems in which she lives, of her worldview completely, that the only thing she could do was have a complete mental break and then recover from that mental break enough to make a choice to change things. So it is fast, absolutely, but I think it works for me. Our secondary protagonist, Tamil, is a little bit less fleshed out in my opinion. He, of course, is fighting the oppression of his people, not just selfishly for his own whims, but to save his niece, to continue the tribe. They're the last two living members of the tribe. They made the crossing and they didn't die. They're the only two left. So his motives are more so, I have to continue this legacy, but on a human level, I have to keep myself alive. I have to keep my niece alive because it's what I promised my sister and my brother-in-law. So his motivations are a lot more, individual. It's not so much grand sweeping changes to the systems and world around him. It's more so survive, which makes a ton of sense because he is put in more of a position of victimhood. But I will say that victimhood feels like his only major character trait. There are obviously moments of real humanity within him and in his discussions, and I don't begrudge him any of that. But it feels like because he is the major victim of the entire situation that we are introduced to as readers, most of his points and most of his discussion we're just supposed to go along with, where I felt like we are supposed to question Siona's motives. We're really not supposed to question anything with Tamil. We're just kind of supposed to follow along blindly. Maybe that's just a personal thing that I felt as I was reading it, but he felt like the weaker character to me overall. I still enjoyed his arc. I still enjoyed the discussions of how do I continue to live in a world where I'm kind of falling in love with my oppressor. That is a very interesting character trope. It's a very interesting topic of conversation, but I felt like we really didn't get a ton of that. By the time we started to flesh out their relationship, the plot was kind of moving too fast and we didn't get as much as I would have liked in terms of a solid character arc. Both main characters, really good. I really have respect for the author's ability just to capture change in a character in such a limited time in comparison to some of these longer epic narratives. So I really enjoyed the characters. I would give it a A-, B+. Another thing that ML Wang is fantastic at is capturing and sticking to a tone. In Sword of Kaigen, there is a solid tone. In Blood over Brighthaven, there is a solid tone. This is a dark academia book, and it is dark, but I feel that it never really gets into the darkness of the worlds of Joe Abercrombie or George R.R. Martin. It's not dark for darkness' sake. It is dark because of the systems in place around the world that our protagonists inhabit, but it is always twinged with a little bit of optimism. There is always a little bit of, well, maybe things can change. I mean, overall, the final act of the book really doesn't work unless we are tonally allowed to think that there may be a positive end to these stories. The sacrifice that Sayona makes doesn't work in a world where everything continues to be dark and terrible and oppressive. It only works if we as the readers are left with an ability to say, you know what, I think the Quen maybe are going to be able to, 3, 4, 5 generations down the line, find a foothold in this society and build themselves back up and have the ability to be looked at as equals. I think that that is necessary for this book to work. And tonally, we are set up to believe that throughout the entire story. Of course, there are dark moments. The magic system is based on the murder of other people. So obviously this is a dark piece of fiction, but there's something about it that hovers above the absolute depravity and darkness of some of the worlds in Joe Abercrombie and George R.R. Martin. Those books leave you wrung out of any type of optimism. You stare at the absolute depravity of humanity in those books. That has been, my experience with those books. And I like those books, but this offers a little glimpse, just the slightest glimpse of optimism and change. And I think that that is such an important tonal aspect of it, because the major themes of this book, of sacrifice, of loss, don't really work unless we are riding the line of that tone. And it is written so well. A couple nitpicks, because it is not a perfect book. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. It may creep up to a 4 as I continue to think about it, but on first read and first real thought about it, 3.5 felt good. The last third of this book feels like it kind of drags to a halt. The pacing in the beginning of this book and towards the middle move really well. But as the revelation about the magic system is made, as Sayona and Tamil have to start battling and wrestling with the fact that they have been using magic that is murdering people to gain power, it begins to slow down. We begin to get into a little bit more of the philosophy of the world, which I liked, but at the same time, I felt like a couple scenes maybe could have been expedited or cut or shifted to move us along at a bit of a faster pace. It just felt like everything kind of dragged to a halt and then finished with a bang really fast in a way that wasn't as swift or as well-paced as the beginning 2/3 of the novel. I felt like there was a specific scene between Sayona and her mentor that we really didn't need. We had kind of covered the character growth with Sayona. We had covered the philosophy at that point. We had covered the fact that the mages were willing to do whatever they can to stay in power, and that means murder. And we didn't need another treatise on why that's important from Sayona's mentor, in my opinion. It felt a little superfluous. I think if we had cut that scene, we maybe would have moved with a little bit more pace and gotten to the conclusion a little bit more satisfactorily. And I don't know, it felt like it slowed down quite a bit. Another thing that just really didn't work for me was the messaging of this book felt pretty overt and pretty heavy-handed at times. It felt like every time Sayona did something, there was some type of quip about, oh, well, she's just a woman, or a woman is a dainty creature, or something that always reminded us of the fact that she's the first woman and that she's breaking through these barriers. And I get that. That is a deep, core, important message in this book. That is what the author is trying to get across for us. But I would have preferred it to be a bit more subtle. I felt like the oppression part of the narrative with Tamil and the Quen was done with a little bit more of a light touch, whereas the feminist aspect of the text was done a little bit too heavy-handed, in my opinion. And there were just moments where it was like, okay, we get it. She is the first mage. She is breaking these barriers. She is being looked down upon because of her sex. We get it. Let's move to something else and continue to show us the great world that you've built and the characters that you're writing and the plot that works really well. Let's move to some of that. We understand the core message. It felt like the author was kind of telling us, don't forget, this is what the book is about, which I understand. It is an important message that the author really wants to drive home, but it felt a little heavy-handed at times. Finally, as strong as the main protagonists are, I felt like our antagonists were a bit of some caricatures. They kind of felt like, just paper tigers or one-dimensional. There wasn't a ton of work given to our antagonists. I think because there weren't really any pure antagonists, it was more so the system was the antagonist and the people who were propping the system up became the antagonist. So there wasn't really an ability for us to learn the motivations of the antagonist. It was more so, we want to maintain the status quo, and because of that, we are the enemy of our protagonist. But to me, it felt like the human representations of those systems fell flat. and we didn't really have a solid antagonist throughout the whole book. So where do we stand overall? I think that this lived up to some expectations, maybe slightly under-delivered with the energy that I was coming into the book with because of how much I enjoyed Sword of Kaigen. If I am judging it just on its own, trying to remove the Sword of Kaigen from the equation, I think it is an incredibly well-written, well-plotted, great text that you will enjoy it, you will have a lot of fun with it if you like dark academia, if you like magic systems, if you like complex world building. I think you will enjoy this book a lot. For me personally, it fell a little bit flat. I still had a lot of fun reading it. I really enjoyed the characterization, the world building, the magic system. I thought were top notch, especially for a standalone series like this. But I do think the Sword of Kaigen clears it as a better novel. It could just be that I prefer the setting and the tone and the storyline of the Sword of Kaigen. That is more, Asian inspired, feudal Japan inspired. There's more military, there is more battle structure, whereas this felt more of an internal text, felt more about dismantling the systems of oppression. Dark academia really isn't my cup of tea in most situations, so I can understand why I preferred the Sword of Kaigen to Blood over Brighthaven, but I would absolutely recommend that you read both of these books. They are so incredibly well written. It is great to have a voice like this in the fantasy space, continuing to write important stories that make sense, that are just really solid from top to bottom. We need more of these books. We need more of standalone fiction, so I absolutely recommend it. Let me know what you guys are reading. Let me know what you thought of both of these books. More specifically, let me know what you thought of Blood over Brighthaven. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Was it just okay? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're reading something that is very, very good, and I will see you in the next video.